Hey, good morning, Stella. Good morning. Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Rox. Good morning, Marilyn. How are you all today? Hope you guys are all doing well. So, continuing, I'm continuing our education on Martin Luther King Jr. I know that day, Martin Luther King holiday, is a couple, like 2 weeks ago, but or a week, I don't remember. A little over a week ago. But just continuing to talk about Martin Luther King and what he did. So I don't know if you know this, but Martin Luther King actually was educated in Pennsylvania. He went to, after he graduated from college, Martin Luther King went to Crozer Theological Seminary, which is in Upton, a little town in Delaware County. Delaware County, Pennsylvania, not all that far from where we are. You go down there, there's actually a memorial marker for Martin Luther King, where he lived when he went to school. That seminary, by the way, Crozer Theological Seminary, has since merged, I think in 1970. It merged with at least one other seminary. It's got a long name now. I can't even remember what the name of it is, but they moved to New York in 1970. So the seminary is no longer in Chester County or Delaware County, Pennsylvania. But that's where Martin Luther King went to seminary in Pennsylvania. While he was there, he attended, and he, I think like interns, you would call it. He worked with the pastor, a pretty famous black pastor, the Calvary Baptist Church, very near where he went to school, down in Chester, PA, also in Delaware County. And there is a memorial marker there. Church is still there. A long history of some pretty influential pastors at that church. But yeah, so there are some Pennsylvania connections to Martin Luther King Jr. Went to school and attended church, went to seminary and attended a church down in Delaware County, Upland and Chester, PA, not West Chester, Chester, PA. After he graduated, after he got his degree in divinity, he went on, by the way, and he got a PhD. He got a doctorate in systematic theology. Went up to Boston University, and he also, while he was there, he took a couple courses at Harvard University. He audited some philosophy courses at Harvard. He got his degree, his doctorate degree, his PhD in systematic theology from Boston University. I think that would have been about 19. I'm going to make sure that somebody's not telling me I can't hear. All right. Yeah. So he came home. This would have been about 1955-ish. Morning, Aaron. Right about, I forget when he graduated, when he got his PhD, about 1955. He met, good morning, Mom. While he was at Boston University, that's where he met Coretta Scott. She was a student there as well. They met, and it's fun reading some of the anecdotes about their dating. She was not interested in marrying a preacher, and was a little bit hesitant to date him until one of their mutual friends kind of stood up for him. And anyway, they got married, came home, and King became a pastor. Dexter Avenue Church. And ultimately, he became a pastor where his dad was, but started out at, I think, Dexter Avenue. I forget. Dexter Avenue Church. Went home, back to his hometown, and became a pastor. And this is about the time when King started to become a national figure. Young guy, still, he's only about his mid-20s, 26, something like that. But in 1955, a young girl named Claudette Colvin, 15-year-old girl, was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama. This was in early 1955. She was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama for refusing to give up her seat to a white person on a Montgomery, on a city bus, a municipal bus. And I think some of us, probably most of us, we're not really familiar with what was going on with some of these laws. But Uh, there were what was called Jim Crow laws, and these laws were both state and local laws, not federal, but state and local laws. And these laws made it illegal for a black person to refuse to give up a seat on a bus for a white person. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So this 15-year-old girl, Claudette Colvin, she refused to give up her seat, and she was arrested. And the black leaders in Montgomery, Alabama, saw her case, and they decided that because she was only 15 years old, they were not going to pursue. She was a minor, weren't going to pursue any legal action at that particular time. But a little bit of information about the Jim Crow laws. I don't know if you know this. The name comes, the Jim Crow law, we think anyway, the name comes, it was used all the way back in 1829. So even pre-Civil War, there was a white actor named Thomas Rice, who did a kind of vaudeville act in blackface, where he would imitate a black person. And the name of the black person in his act was Jump Jim Crow. And it was an insulting name, derogatory name, Jim Crow. And so it became kind of an insulting name for black people. And so these Jim Crow laws were laws all about keeping the races separate, keeping white and black people separate. And most historians think that the name Jim Crow came from the act that white actor did, Thomas Rice. They were these Jim Crow laws. They enforced segregation between white and black people. Now, interestingly, these laws were already being tested, these Jim Crow laws. In several states, several municipalities, there were various cases that were testing the legality, the constitutionality of Jim Crow laws. And as far back as 1896, in a famous case, Plessy versus Ferguson. It's a famous Supreme Court case. You probably heard that name, Plessy versus Ferguson. The Supreme Court in 1896 actually upheld Jim Crow laws. And this is where the phrase separate but equal came into being, because the Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional to keep the races separate. Not enough coffee this morning. Keep the races separate as long as they each had equal facilities. Now, in practice, we all know the facilities were hardly equal. In fact, in many cases, there were no facilities for black people at all. But as long as you had, in theory, the Supreme Court said, as long as you had equal resources, restaurants, buses, schools, swimming pools, whatever it is, then Jim Crow laws could be held as constitutional. So these were constitutional, and essentially what they did at all public facilities, they mandated the separation of the races, white and black. Now, what I was talking about, the bus issue with this 15-year-old girl was in 1955. And one reason that the black community was looking for specific cases to test Jim Crow laws is because a year earlier, in 1954, in another famous case, the Brown versus Board of Education, the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, 9-0, the Supreme Court said that when it comes to education, separation is unconstitutional. They said that when it comes to education, you cannot keep the races separate. In fact, they essentially said that separate is unequal. To say separate and equal is a farce, the Supreme Court said. Now, the Supreme Court didn't really tell states how they were supposed to end their segregation educationally, but they did say in that case, they did say that they had to end segregation, quote, with all deliberate speed. Now, that was in 54, Brown versus Board of Education. So here you are a year later, and obviously, this, as you know, schools became another issue, another very heated, violent issue in the South. But a year later, the Black community was looking to essentially test other Jim Crow laws. And so in early 1955, this 15-year-old girl, Claudette, got arrested in Montgomery, Alabama, for refusing to give up her seat to a white person. Now, as I said, they looked at this episode, the Black community looked at this, and they decided a minor, it would not be good to put a minor through what she was going to have to go through. So they kind of waited for another case. And then in December 1st, 1955, famously, a young woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person. And that was the spark that began the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott. Now, by the way, Claudette's case, that 15-year-old girl's case, she was arrested, thrown in prison. Her case also went to the Supreme Court, and ultimately, as I understand it, it would be partly her case that the Supreme Court would rule against segregation on buses. But it was not Claudette that the Black community used. That was not the spark. They waited till December 1st, 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white person. Now, here's the thing. And my guess is most of us didn't know that this is the way segregation worked on the buses. This is really, not only is it fascinating, but it's also absolutely heartbreaking that this is what was going on in the South. On the municipal buses, the city buses in Montgomery, Alabama, there was a front and a back door. And the back 10 seats were reserved for Black people. If you were Black, you had to enter the bus at the back door. The back 10 seats were reserved for Black people. The front 10 seats were reserved for white people. No Black person could sit there, always reserved for white people, even though 75% of the riders in Montgomery were Black. This is the way it worked. If you're white, you go in the front door. The front 10 seats are reserved for you. Back 10 seats for the Black. Now, there were 16 seats in the middle, and those seats could be used by either Black people or by white people. The Blacks had to fill those seats from the back to the front, and the whites would fill them from the front to the back, those middle 16 seats. Now, they also had a law that said that no Black person could sit next to a white person on the buses, which meant that if you're a Black person and there's a white person in your row, you can't sit in that row. And this is where it gets complicated. And you can see kind of just the craziness of these laws. So the other thing that was going on, there was a couple things going on with this. One, Black people had to pay at the front of the bus, but if they were on a route, and this happened regularly, if they're on a route, you come in, and this happened to Rosa Parks, by the way, and Rosa more than once. There was a particular driver that would do this to Rosa. Now follow this. If you're a Black person, you have to enter the back door, but you pay at the front. So if you walk up front to pay, you exit the bus at the front, but you have to go around and re-enter the back door. And certain bus drivers would, when the black person paid and got off, they would just take off. And that happened to Rosa Parks. And she understandably got so angry. And there was one particular bus driver that would do that to her. And so she started simply refusing to get on the bus that he was driving. But at any rate, so this is what would happen if the buses were full. Now, that does not mean that every seat was taken, remember, because if you're a white person sitting in a row meant that whole row of seats, because a black person couldn't sit next to you, that whole row of seats could not be taken by a black person. So if the bus was full and a black person entered, that black person, I watched the movie Hidden Figures. It's a really good movie. The book's actually better, and I like the movie, but the book's better because the book gives you more, you learn a lot more in the book. So watch the movie, but also read the book, Hidden Figures. There's a bunch of good movies out. So if you're a black person, you get on the bus, and even if there are seats, but there's a white person in a row, you can't sit there. So if you're a black person, you have to stand. Now, if you are a white person and enter the bus, what you would do is the next row of seats became, even if it's in that middle section, even if it's in the black section, that next row of seats would automatically become a white row. And the black people in that row would have to get up and stand to make a new row for white people. So you see what's going on. This isn't just a case of, a black person has to stand. This was a whole system of discrimination, and it's a complicated system. So on this day, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was actually seated in the first row of the middle section, which is that section for both whites and blacks. She was not seated in the section reserved for white people. Seated in the first row of the middle section when a white person got on board. Now, there were multiple seats in that row, but the law said that a black person can't sit next to a white person. So that row now becomes a row for white people. And Rosa Parks famously refused to stand up. It's not just the seat, it's also the row. She refused to stand up and surrender her seat to a white person. She was arrested. And there's a famous picture of her being fingerprinted in the prison. And it was that case, the black leaders, when that happened, when she was arrested, the black leaders decided this was going to be our resistance to segregation in the on the municipal buses. It started the Montgomery bus boycott. That bus boycott would last for a year longer than a year, actually a little bit longer than a year. And it was this Montgomery bus boycott that catapulted Martin Luther King to national fame. Other cities started bus boycotts. Various boycotts started really against a lot of business practices, etc. It also became violent. Martin Luther King's house was firebombed during this bus boycott. The bus boycott was hard on the black people because obviously they depended on the buses for transportation, and you depend on transportation for jobs. Most of the black, I don't know if most, but a significant number of black people, you didn't own cars. You depended on buses. So it was hard. It was a hard thing for black people. Became very violent, as many of you will know. And it ended December of the next year, December 20th, 1956, when the case, and I'm pretty sure it was the case involving Claudette, made its way to the Supreme Court because in Alabama, a district court had ruled that separation was unconstitutional, that segregation on buses was unconstitutional. The case made its way to the Supreme Court in December 20th, I think it was 1956. The Supreme Court upheld the lower court's ruling, and they essentially said that on buses, segregation was unconstitutional and illegal. Now, the backlash to this, by the way, we sometimes think, well, okay, then all is well. The Supreme Court ruled. Actually, it's the backlash is when it really started to get ugly and started to get violent. One day after the Supreme Court ruling in 1956, somebody shot a shotgun through, blasted Martin Luther King's front door. His house had already been firebombed during the bus boycott. The day after the ruling, somebody shot a shotgun through the front door of his house, destroying the front door. Fortunately, nobody was killed. The very next day after that, a young teenage girl, a black teenage girl, was exiting a bus, and a gang of white males violently beat up this young teenage black girl. Several days later, there were several snipers that started shooting at buses, shooting at buses that had black people on, shooting at the black section. And at least in one case, a pregnant woman was severely injured when a bullet passed through both of her thighs, both of her legs. She lived, but was really severely injured. And in January of that year, I think it was January of the next year, so it'd be 57, January of 57, 5 black churches were firebombed in the city. So it really got violent and got very ugly. And in response to this, by the way, way too long. I'm sorry. I'll end it now. In response to this, Montgomery, Alabama, they passed even stronger Jim Crow laws. They lost the battle of the buses, but they passed laws that said that black and white kids could not even play together on playgrounds. Black and white people couldn't. They made this a law. Black and white people couldn't even associate at all. So things got worse before they got better. But this is the Montgomery bus boycott, and this is how it got started. This is what catapulted Martin Luther King to national fame. And I think we'll talk about him one more time and talk about, you can see that the violence is getting started, and it is getting really, really ugly. And Martin Luther King came to understand that violence wasn't going to get the black community anywhere. And he very famously took a nonviolent approach. So that's kind of where we'll finish up with this on Thursday. But this is the start. Very interesting stuff. Heartbreaking. And, I know that I shouldn't even get into politics, but it's interesting because the South was the South was dominated by the Democratic Party. However, today we look at the Southern Democrats of this period and we blame them, but you can't think the Republicans were innocent. There were Republicans called the Lily White Republicans who, in the South, although they weren't in the majority in the South, the Democrats controlled the states and the cities. The Lily White Republicans, that's what they were called. They were all for segregation as well, and upheld it. So both parties were in cahoots to maintain racial segregation in the South. So it ends up getting violent, 1955-ish. It ends up getting violent. Actually, it already had 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education and what was going on there. But we'll finish up on Thursday, talk about Martin Luther King and his nonviolent approach. And that's where we'll be done. Alrighty. So thank you much. Sorry it went long. And let me pray for all of us, and then we will get on with our days. God, I thank you. I thank you for men like Martin Luther King Jr. Meant women like Rosa Parks, um, Claudette Colvin, and so many leaders in the Black community who really risked everything, risked their jobs, their families, their reputations, and their lives because of the injustice that they saw and that they lived every day. God, I pray that increasingly we'd be people who understand that when something isn't just, that it is unrighteous, and that you are a God who deplores what is unrighteous in our communities, in our families, in our churches, in our states, and in our world. God, I pray that you will increasingly make us to be people who are able to see our world with your eyes, and to be people who stand up, stand against unrighteousness, and stand for what is right and true and good. God, that often will take us to places where we will need courage, even in our churches. Sometimes we will need to be people of courage. And I pray, God, that you'd give us courage and help us to be strong and faithful to you. God, I thank you for the day ahead of us. I pray, God, that we would walk through this day knowing that you are very present. Your presence is real in our lives. You're really with us. I pray, God, you'll help us to believe that as we walk through this day. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Alrighty, everybody. Hope you have a good day. And the ice storm has begun. I see out there. So see you all. See you all Thursday. Tomorrow was preschool day. I think we're done with colors if you watch preschool. So love you all. Goodbye.